go through just a quick reminder of what we talked about last time. We're going to have, and then talk a bit more about the one of the things that's within Lean about non-value add and wastes. And we'll also have a bit of a review of how you got on with thinking about your particular areas. So I just quickly go back through objectives. So we're here to provide you with the skills and tools to implement Lean for gain. We're going to do a combination of theory and practical. So after each session, there will be some activity to do. And the hope is that, you know, we not only give you some actual gain through the projects you select, but once we've finished the training, you're able to carry it on. So these are short bite-sized chunks about tools and techniques, and we'll do some exercises today. As I say, we'll have a call to action at the end. And we've got these four modules, sorry. So the first one being an overview of Lean and its 5 principles and how they apply to productivity. So this is the second one and the last one of that first module. We'll then be looking at how we actually identify areas for improvements and doing the detailed analysis through something called waste walks and process maps. Then how to actually take that data and make improvements. And then finally, we will talk about visual management and plan, do, check, act cycle to involve staff in productivity and product quality improvement. So that is about how do you maintain and continually improve. So here's a long list of all of the sessions. We've got 1 tick in the box now, so that's a good start, and we're down to being able to identify the target area for improvements and identify waste. So quick summary of the last session. So we talked about where all of this stuff came from, and we talked about the 5 Lean principles and how it can be applied to a variety of products and processes. So the things to remember about the history of Lean were, you know, there's 3 important things that learned right back into the early 20s to a man who was making muskets, through to the point where Toyota picked up the techniques, through to the point where it's being applied across sector and now in horticulture and agriculture. But the 3 important things were, if we study work, if we really get underneath how things actually happen, we can make improvements. If we engage the people who do the work and get them to think about improvements, that gets multiplied. And actually, we need to understand our customer requirements. So we have to do those 3 things. We need to understand the work in detail. We need to engage with the people who do the work, and we need to be close to what the customers require. So up until Toyota, they were very good at doing the first one. But actually, for the second one, in terms of engaging with the people who do it, they were very poor at that, and they had very unhappy staff and unhappy workers. And also, they weren't close to the customer requirements because people like Ford just said, I'll only make 1 type of car and it'll only be 1 color. And of course, as customers, we want variety. So understanding those needs was really important. So that was the first thing, just a quick sort of brief over history. And then we talked about the Lean principles, which is in this box here. So these Lean principles come from Lean Thinking by Womack and Jones. And that was a study of how the Japanese manufacturing and automotive industry were implementing Lean to competitive advantage. So the first step is specifying value in the eyes of the customer. So being really clear about what is it that you're providing the customer that sort of value. And then where does that value sit within the value stream from the start of the process to the end? You have to understand that whole value stream. And these areas are the ones we're going to particularly talk about today. Is if we look at that value stream, we'll find that there's lots of things that don't potentially add value. And therefore, if we remove those things, the value will flow a lot better. So the third principle is flow. Number 4 is ensuring that processes, as best they can, and we understand, and I think Neil talked about this, that within this sector, this is difficult due to the length of time for growing, etc. But ensure that as best we can, we understand the customer's needs and we make to the customer's requirements. And the final of the 5 was about attaining perfection. And I think I mentioned that's not my favorite word in this. I think the thing to think about of that final one is about continually improving towards perfection rather than thinking everything has to be perfect. It's about making small incremental changes towards perfection. So we talked about, and Neil last time went through a number of case studies that we'd done from the previous SmartHort program and other programs about how this can be applied in reality, and the sort of things we found when we looked at things like sticking processes, picking processes, pack houses, etc., etc. So hopefully from that you could see some common themes. And finally, the last point just in this previous session summary was, most of these things are low capital, they're low investment, they're fairly easy to do. We'll prioritize those things that give benefit but are fairly easy to do and don't involve a huge cost. They can take a bit of time to do, but you get the rewards even because they are fairly quick. Engaging staff and making sure we've got top-down commitment is key. And the final one is about test and trialing. So as we get through the sessions and we talk about once we've got some ideas and things we want to change, we'll massively encourage you to try things out. There's a lot of time wasted in making changes and trying to make it perfect, whether you actually learn so much more by trying to test things out, as long as you can do that in a safe and risk-free way. We're going to go through, we've done the first couple of things, which was review of our last session. And we're going to talk about non-value adding activity or waste for most of today. So we're going to go through something called the 8 wastes. And what I'm going to ask you to do at the end of during the session, we're going to take a bit of time just to have a think about where we might see some of these wastes in our business. And then at the end, I've got a template, etc., for you to maybe try in the areas that you're talking about. So, value definition. So I'm just going to take a bit of time to talk about value in the first instance. So you'll remember the first of the 5 lean principles was specifying value in the eyes of the customer. So being really clear about what it is that you're doing that adds value to the customer. And what we find is that there's process steps and activities can be defined as adding value if they build on some simple criteria. They seem simple, but sticking to these gives you an idea of whether they're value steps or not. The first is the customer willing to pay for it? They see it increases the worth of the product they're receiving, or that they experience and they want it. So they're being clear about what they want, and that's the thing they're paying for. The second criteria is it's done right first time. So if you think of yourselves as customers, we don't expect the thing that's adding value to be done a number of times to get it right. And normally this one's slightly more tricky. Normally what we see in these process steps is they make a transformation, so that something changes as a result of them. So if you look at a process step, what we normally find is the value steps are the things that the customer is willing to pay for, done right first time, and it's a transformation. So the types of things are the actual process of picking, the actual step of picking. So if I think last time I showed, the customer value as we want are, in this case, raspberries in a punnet. So them actually at the point they hit the punnets, that's a value step. And over to the right, the point where the sticking's actually happening is the value step. It's the actual point though, the moving around of hands, all of the stuff that's around that step, that one thing happening, that's not the value. The value is just at the point it transforms it. So the point where it's picked, I presume as you pull that fruit off the branch, then moving it away from the branch, or you taking your hands toward it, they are not value. The value is just the moment that the customer's paying for, which is getting that piece of fruit off the vine. And in sticking, we gave the examples of how lots of different people. Last time, I think we showed a slide of 4 stickers, of which the worst was, excuse me, sorry about that, apologies. So the worst sticker was half the pace of the fastest sticker. And that was not the actual case, again, of the actual point of sticking. It was the way that they prepared themselves. It was the way they did the work around those. So they're value examples. It's what the customer's paying for. It's that something's being transformed and it's done right first time. So it's quite an important concept in Lean. So I'm going to just hold off again to see if that makes sense in terms of value. Okay. Right then, so if we've got these value steps and activities defined as value, then everything else is known as non-value adding or waste. So unfortunately, we'll interchange these things. I've been doing this for so many years, I interchange them, but we'll try and call it non-value adding most of the time, but it's also known as waste. And if you were particularly interested, the Japanese word for it is muda. So it's non-value adding or waste is everything else. So everything that's not a value step is known as non-value adding. So if we were to think of an end-to-end process, now this is different. I just want to get your idea, a simple process from a customer order through to delivery to a customer. And think of your own processes, but just think about generally that sort of process in terms of other things that happen. In reality, so we've said of between 20 and 35%, so Dan was the closest. It's usually about 5 to 20% of the time. So why is this important? So, and I said this is a general rule, but as we map and you do your waste walks, you'll probably find it'll be around that area if we stick to those rules about what value is and what non-value is. The interesting thing, therefore, in terms of improving productivity, if we make the 5 or the 20% better, if we make it twice as quick, for the overall process, it has a marginal impact. Whereas if we look at all the other things that are going on, all the things that aren't adding value, we can usually make a significant improvement. And we also find that those non-value adding activities are usually things that are quite easy to change. And, you know, again, making some of those marginal gains in those non-value adding activities are the things that really help processes improve. So the principles of these things, this is why it's interesting that, you know, so I think Neil and both I spoke about our background in automotive, and we spoke about how Lean has been applied across industries. It's certainly true to say it's, you know, it's helpful to have more and more experience within an industry, but from a principle point of view, the bit that we're not particularly interested in is the technical bits of the value. The bit we're interested in is everything else that goes on around that. So focus on the non-value add are the things that will help mostly get productivity improvements. So as I say, looking at just looking at the speed of a picker and looking at how they pick is often it's the other stuff that happens around them. Are we all, I was going to say we're all happy with that. I'm not sure it's something to be happy about. Are we all comfortable with that as a concept? This is quite a crucial sort of foundation of Lean. And also your scores, generally people go a lot higher than that. Generally people think at least 50%. So you're pretty close to the button with that. So yeah, so as I said, value is normally fine. It's what the customer wanted. Focus on speeding up value has a minimal impact, and reducing waste gives more benefit and improves flow, which is that fourth Lean principle. So 8 wastes or non-value activities. So when it is non-value adding or waste, we can categorize them into these 8 areas, and it's done through someone called Tim Woods. So we have an acronym of Tim Woods, which is as useful for me to remember them as it is for everyone else. So the important thing to say about this just gives us a useful language to be able to see what waste they are, to be able to talk about them, discuss them. I think it doesn't hugely matter which category they sit within. We usually find that, you know, if it's a waste, if it's non-value add, they're things that we should be looking at moving towards. So I'll quickly go down them now, and then we're going to go a bit more into detail. So they are transport, moving work around, inventory or stocking, overstocking, work that sits around not finished or waiting to be sent to the customer, movement of people. So that's the people equivalent of transport. So people moving around, waiting or delays. So people, product or resources waiting for something. Overproduction is about doing too much or doing something before it's needed. Over-processing is doing more than the customer wants, so exceeding the value. defects are if things aren't completed to the correct standard or the processes are taking time doing checking. And skills and talents is the final one. Doesn't quite fit the same model, but also, again, back to the experience with Toyota, we found that that people's skills were not being utilized appropriately. So we get people to come into work and kind of hang their brain up at the door and then get on with their activity, rather than trying to engage them in improvements and trying to get them to help us make things better. And as Neil pointed out, I think often what happens is if we engage people and talk to them about how we can make things better, it's better for them as well as it is for the business. So I'm going to go through each of those. I think they're fairly obvious. So I've got a kind of slide with products moving around. So products moving from being picked across a field to somewhere else. So you'll see a lot of this in most places of just stuff moving around. I'm going to flick to the movement of people, see lots of people moving around. And these are all things that aren't adding value particularly to the process. So people moving around and people moving products around, or products being moved around on conveyors. So in pack houses, we see lots of products being moved around on conveyors and so forth. So transport of the work around or transport of people about. Inventory of overstocking, so that sits around not finished or waiting to be sent to the customer. I think, again, this is more of a challenge in your industry and in the sector because of the growing cycle, etc., and trying to synchronize that. But we find if you can't synchronize your sales, or if you make too much on the basis of just need it, then that you end up with inventory overstocking, which there's costs associated with that. There's quality implications associated with that as well. So we talked about movement of people, waiting. So people, product and resources waiting. So this is often product sits waiting for a batch to finish. So it might sit with in that bottom tray in this picture. The first tray that was picked has now sat and waited for all of this other stuff to be done before it can be moved, which again is another waste. Transport things around to another process. So it's sitting being batched up. We often find that people are waiting. So without wanting to pick out on people on this particular picture, there's probably a couple of people there waiting for information, waiting for instructions, waiting for the next job, etc., etc. So people, resources, product, waiting. So we often find that waiting is a huge thing within a process. The third, we're down to overproduction. I said the third, must be the fourth or fifth. This is doing too much or doing something before it's needed. So this is making too much. Over processing is performing more than adds value to the customer. So over processing, we don't see a huge amount of this, and we don't see a huge amount of overproduction. But again, due to the cycles and the way that obviously agriculture and horticulture works, it's slightly different. Over processing, I put a couple of examples there of, do we need a banana in another packet? Do we need to have apples wrapped up in cellophane? That's over processing. That's doing more than the client needs. And this is often about being really clear and really understanding what the client needs, what your customer needs. And then we've got defects. So I think these people here are taking, balancing out trays, punnets for raspberries. So they've been picked into punnets. They're now redoing them. And I know from the conversation, so I know from seeing picking and packing operations that obviously a lot of what happens in the pack house is a consequence of sometimes what happens at the pick face, and the other way around. So some of those things that produce quality. So we spend time checking quality. We spend time reworking things due to quality. Then skills and talents, people's skills and talent not being used effectively. So before I just go on to those two, there we have the 8 wastes. So we're going to do a bit of an exercise. We're going to take a bit of a break in a minute, but we're going to do an exercise to see if you can spot some of these in your own businesses. Any questions about the 8 wastes? No? Okay. I mentioned Ben Hartman and the Lean Farm the last time we spoke, and I picked up a couple of things that he also spoke about as additional waste. So you can imagine with these things, there's a number of wastes that can add it to these lists of wastes. I think a couple of interesting one here is, and certainly the first one about overburdening. It's making sort of impossible or unreasonable targets on people, and workers and equipment are overstretched, which it leads to burnout injury, and it also leads to poor quality as well. So I think it's just being conscious of overburdening people, and I think that's again why it's important to find ways of making it better for the business and better for the people working within it. This is a difficult one, but uneven production and sales. So if you do read Lean Thinking, one of the things they talk about is smoothing your demand. It's a kind of very throwaway phrase within Lean, that you should just get to a point where you get regular orders all at the same time. Now, life isn't like that. I understand that, but the more you can do to help have even demand, even work, regular work, helps. So not lots of peaks and troughs in terms of demand. Obviously, no, it's seasonal here, but I mean, I'm talking within season here. So there we are, 8 wastes plus these extra 2. So I'm just going to go through them once more, and then I'm going to pause to see any questions, and then we're going to take a bit of a break, and I'm going to give you an activity to do. So first one, transport, is moving the work around. And that's different to movement of people, which is moving the people around. Inventory of overstocking is work that sits around not finished or waiting to be sent to the customer. Waiting and delays is either people, the product, or other resources waiting for whatever reason. Overproduction is doing too much or doing something before it's needed. Overprocessing is performing more activities than is required by the customer. Defects is about producing bad quality or having to check quality in. Skills and talent is about not appropriately utilizing the skills of the resource. I meant to say on the defects one, it's about trying to get quality right first time rather than checking quality in. And then we talked about that overburdening and uneven production and sales. Okay, so what I want you to do, if you're together in your companies, is probably it's easier to do this together, is just go down this list and have a think about some examples of each of these wastes. Don't worry too much about the overburdening and uneven production and sales. Think about, for the Tim Woods, excuse me, see if you can think of a couple of examples of where you see that in your business, or where you've got some examples of where you see that in the processes you're looking at would be particularly helpful as well. So have a go through these and think about 1 or 2 examples for each if you can. And also, I have a user guide of how to do some waste spotting. So what we want you to do this time is do some waste spotting. Is to go and have a look at the process, or if you can't look at the process that you're wanting to work on, go and have a look at other things that are running and just see if you can see some of the wastes. So let me just quickly share with you the user guide, because there's 2 ways of doing it. So hopefully you should see that. As I say, we'll send these around as well. So you can either do this on the basis of a team. So if you wanted to have a chat with your colleagues and introduce some other people to these concepts, then I think that's not a bad idea to start with. And you can actually explain to them some of the things that we've talked about today in terms of what's non-value and what's waste, and present the 8 wastes and ask people to have a look at the process, the area that you're the area that you're potentially going to look at, or another area if that process isn't running, and see if they can identify wastes within that process just by looking at and observing what things are happening. A good way of doing it actually is trying to take a snapshot of an area. So you might want to just take some pictures, take a video, a short video, and just have a look at look at the product, look at the people, look at the machines, and see if they are fitting into any of these categories in terms of the wastes, to see how prevalent it is. So you could do that over a period of time and you would get an idea where most of the wastes are. So you could do that as a team, which I've given some, I won't go through all of this because we're getting a bit short of time, or you can do that as an individual. So there's some tips there. So find a spot in the area and have a look. A couple of really important things just to say to you. So the words waste and non-value add are kind of quite emotive. So if you've not taken people through this, to start to talk to them about they're a waste or their non-value add is not great. The other thing is to try and focus on the process, not the people. So I know I've talked about people moving around, but the reason they're moving around is because of the process. The reason they're waiting is because they haven't received an instruction or they're not clear what to do. So generally, as a rule of thumb, and this will help you in terms of doing this work, it's mostly not the people's fault. It's the process, it's the ways of working, it might be their training. And try and think about it from that point of view, because it will help you have conversations with people as you go down the track. So try to not focus on it's people doing the wrong thing. The reason they're doing that activity is because that's what the process has defined they should do, or they're not clear about what they should do, and that therefore is a mistake either in their supervision or their training, etc. So what we want you to do before the next session is to go and do this waste spotting. So have a look for the areas that you've come out as promising from the selection, undertake a waste spot. So go out and have a look at those areas and see if you can see the wastes. Now, I understand, and we've already had this conversation partly, that for some areas that you're thinking of working on, they're not in production at the moment. So what I'd suggest you do is a couple of things. One is to maybe go and find something that is in production and have a look at that, just as a point of doing the exercise, because I think it's useful to go and see. There's a really big important thing within Lean, which is not to make, not to have perceptions, not think we know what's going on, is to go and actually understand it and look at it. So I'd encourage you, if there's something happening, to go and do a bit of a waste spotting exercise. You'll need to just tell the people involved in the work, just in case they think you're marking them down or doing something else. So I'd suggest you do that, but also you might have a think about how that process, either in the field when it is in production or not, how you might think about what are some of the waste that, if you remember what it was, how it enacted the last time it was actually running. So that's what I want you to have a look at the end of this time. So that should help you just see further into, is the area I've selected got some big opportunities in terms of improvements? I'm not going to go through that. So we're at 2 minutes, so I am going to very quickly do a summary. We'll put the templates, etc., onto the sites. In the last minute, I'm just going to quickly do this summary. First of the 5 lean principles: specify value in the eyes of the customer. So being clear about what is value in the eyes of the customer. Anything that's not value, any step that's not value, is waste. And 80 to 95% of most lead times is wastes. And we can categorize those wastes against those 8 different areas. And I added a couple of extras on the basis of the Lean Farm book by Ben. I've forgotten his second name. Apologies, but it's in the slides. So the next session is we're going to do some more detail about how you do some process mapping. So I think that's after the Christmas break, and then so hopefully you can come back to the next session with a bit of the waste spotting done yourselves through the templates and through the user guides.